Award for Best Fiction, A Mind That Traverses from AI to Pop Culture. Please welcome our final storyteller of the day, Professor and Research Supervisor of English at Hislop College, Nagpur, Dr. Prantik Banerjee.
What if I told you that is it possible for an idea to be released from a classroom like a butterfly which turns into a bee with a sting? I'm sure you would have heard this particular quote many a times, but this is precisely what I wish to show to you today. You may also have heard this very, very famous quote attributed to the Duke of Wellington, who, after winning the historic Battle of Waterloo, defeating whom? Defeating Napoleon. He said that the Battle of Waterloo was won on the playing fields of Eton. But did you know that another decisive moment in world history, in American history, the Black Civil Rights Movement, took place, or rather, it drew its inspiration from the playing field of a school, or rather a college in Nagpur and an ashram in Sevagram, Wardha, which is close to Nagpur. Friends, the year was 1953. The playground was in Hislop College, Nagpur. And the day was that of the university championship match in football. The coach of football team was a black American. A black American who had come in order to escape from military conscription, and he had joined Hislop College as a physical education teacher and a sports coach. His name was James Lawson. That day, on the day of the championship match, well, the Hislop College team lost terribly. In fact, it turned out to be a particularly ugly physical game wherein Lawson's team, his own team players, I think half the side, came back after the match injured and bruised. This particular defeat, this failure of his team pulling down the college, made Lawson feel not only defeated but also dejected. He felt so troubled that there were a couple of thoughts that came to his mind, a couple of questions that came to his mind. Questions such as, how does a game of football, a game of tripping legs and pushing elbows and kicking at the shins by the rival team, how do you call it a fair game? How does a game of football, what kind of lessons can it give to people like you and me for battling, or rather to combat the larger or the bigger battles of life? These particular questions that troubled James Lawson on that day stayed with him until he made a trip to Gandhiji's ashram in Sevagram. It wasn't supposed to be nothing more than a kind of a moral booster, a mood-lifting trip for him, a fun-filled day trip. But something happened to Lawson on that day. What he saw during his visit to the ashram was a couple of quotations of Gandhiji being displayed on the walls of the ashram by the inmates. And one of the quotations was that violence is a concession to human weakness. Satyagraha is an obligation to human strength. And the other quote was what most of you would know. Be the change that you wish to see in this world. Such was the impact of these two Gandhian quotes on James Lawson that he stayed back in Nagpur in India for the next couple of years. Not next couple of years, in fact 3 years. So the period between 1953 and 1955, James Lawson made several visits to Bapuji's ashram in Sevagram. There, what did he do? Well, he pored over all the books written by Gandhi and on Gandhi. And he also learned about Gandhiji's life, about his teachings from the inmates of the ashram. You could say that this small thing not only changed his life, not only did he go on to stay back for 3 years, but this kind of an apprenticeship that he got himself into to Gandhian philosophy, later on in a couple of years was to turn into a tornado when he crossed the Atlantic again. So when in 1956 he went back to the US, some of the things that he had learned in that ashram stayed with him. What kind of things? For example, this marvelous, amazing power that he had seen, or that he had read and seen and observed about Gandhi bringing to the poor masses of India the courage, the strength, and the resilience to do what? To take on the might of an entire British Empire. With what? With non-violence as a political tool, as a political weapon. So when he went back to the US in 1956, he saw his own country caught in a particularly and extremely violent civil rights revolution. This was the time of the Jim Crow laws. The Jim Crow laws that split American society into half between blacks and whites. This was also the time that Lawson witnessed how black youths were fighting, they were waging a pitched battle against a racist white American government. This was also the time when Lawson saw how whites were denying to the blacks simple things like sitting at the same table and having coffee, for instance, or boarding the same bus, or not even being able to send their children, black folks not being able to send their children to schools that were exclusively meant for whites. Lawson saw, observed, and what came back to him was those 3 years that he had spent in Bapuji's ashram in Sevagram. The lessons that he had learned from Gandhi, which would alter not only his life, but which will embark him on something bigger, larger, something far more remarkable that would bring about a turning point in American history. You would remember Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr., well, he met Martin Luther King Jr. By then, James Lawson had already become a pastor. And it was when he met Martin Luther King Jr., who incidentally had spent already a year in jail because he was leading American black youths, into protest marches and street rallies which had turned particularly violent. Friends, it was James Lawson who convinced Martin Luther King to believe in the political efficacy and moral superiority of Gandhiji's method of bringing about political revolution in a non-violent way. So the two of them together, Lawson, who started, remember, his journey from Nagpur, from Sevagram, and Martin Luther King, together they combined in order to adopt Gandhian methods of bringing about political revolution. In order to do what? In order to free black people from the tyranny of white racism. When Lawson met Luther for the first time, this is what is reported to have said. He said, "The time has come for all of American black youths to be with Gandhi. So let's be with Gandhi." Now, this particular episode, such an important episode, you would think, I'm sure you would agree, such an important episode, such an important chapter in an American history, it finds no mention in the official histories and the media reports in America. In fact, it doesn't find a mention even in local records and local archives. Thanks to a professor, friend of mine, Professor Vinay Lal, who is an eminent historian in UCLA, with whom I've had the opportunity. In fact, I'm collaborating on a project with him. Thanks to his efforts, we are trying to set the record straight. What record? To bring what has been consigned to the margins and footnotes of history about how a black American took inspiration from Sevagram and, mind you, from the playing grounds of Hislop College, and went on to bring about a phenomenal change in the history of American politics. Isn't that a butterfly effect? Small things leading to a big change. So while it is true that the Battle of Waterloo was fought and won from the playing fields of Eton, it won't be wrong for me to say that the battle for black freedom was also won by taking inspiration from a playground in Hislop and an ashram, a simple ashram in Sevagram. Such are the transformative power of ideas. Such is the domino effect of two disconnected things separated by no less than the Atlantic, crossing borders, importing ideas, and look, what a revolution and what a change it has impacted upon American history itself. How many of you remember this line? Ke bhaiya all is well. Well, I'm sure everybody does. It is from the film Three Idiots. We love the film, don't we? I mean, it's already become a cult classic with its lovable characters, its ripping dialogues, its hummable songs. Why did it become a cult classic? I think the film came out in 2009, but it continues to be an inspiration for the simple reason that not only did it become a box office hit, but it did something more phenomenal. It captured the spirit of the youth. Our people, you people trying to break through the shackles of a fossilized education system. Rote learning, cramming, losing your sleep over what? A couple of grades which is on the paper not worth a toilet paper. The film became something more than a Chetan Bhagat adaptation of a Chetan Bhagat book. And you would of course know that Raju Hirani is from our city. But of course you would know that Raju Hirani is also an ex-Cyclopean. Did you know that? But of course you wouldn't know that this particular line, "All is well," that became a kind of a refrain from the entire film, like a catchphrase, and also became part of the peppy number that you and I still continue to hum and draw inspiration from. That was Hirani's Desi salute or Desi namaskar. Let's get it this way. It was Hirani's Desi namaskar to Shakespeare. He borrowed this line, or rather, he modified this line from a Shakespearean play called All's Well That Ends Well. And in an interview, Hirani said that while he had forgotten practically everything that he had learned while he was doing junior college from Hislop, from the English class, for some reason or the other, while he was making and directing the film, hey, he remembered Shakespeare. He remembered what the English professor had told him, that once upon a time there was, a bald and a bearded guy who wrote a play called All's Well That Ends Well. So he decided to use it. And the rest, as they say, became history. By the way, old Hislopians, that is Raju Hirani's teacher, still remember him to be an outstanding student. They remember him to be spending more time outside the class than inside the class. Well, you could say, therefore, that college has its own moments of butterfly effect. It has produced butterfly effects. It has inspired not one, but two legends. Two legends, one from the playground of Hislop and one from the classroom, or let us say outside the classroom, but two legends who have gone on to make one history in cinema and the other history in politics. Have I released plenty of butterflies already from the Hislop classrooms? And have I, if I've not convinced you yet that these are butterflies, these are not ordinary butterflies, these are butterflies which fly like carrying the sting of a bee. And so I said, if I refer to a playground, can the classroom be far behind? Here comes another butterfly. To create, you got to break the rules. And to change, to make a big change, a change that can transform not just you and people around you, but something that can create a ripple across the country or even sometimes cross borders, you need to raise the right questions. Henry Ford. What do I mean by right questions? Henry Ford invented what? Invented the assembly line, changing a question from how to get people to the work to how do you get work to the people? Edward Jenner discovered vaccine for smallpox by making a small change in the question. Rather than saying, why do people suffer from smallpox? He said, why don't milkmaids get smallpox? And Salman Rushdie, writing his Midnight's Children, the book that won the Booker of Booker Awards, asked himself, what happens if I were to chutneyfy and biryanize the Queen's English and fictionalize India's freedom moment at midnight? I've always believed that the classroom is the greatest, or rather is the biggest laboratory for the greatest of ideas. And so here comes another butterfly. In 1956, a young boy from a Christian Bengali family came all the way from Kolkata to, hello, Nagpur. Yeah, mine are very local stories. Hey, but local stories that have gone global. All right. So he came to study medicine, by the way. 6 months into the course from the government medical college, he had enough of science and surgery, and he dropped out of that course. He dropped out of the course and joined what? Joined wanting to do a BA and an MA in sociology. From where? Hislop College. So, in one of his classes, English classes, there you go again. In one of his English classes, the English professor, who also happened to be an Englishman, told the class that, listen up, Macaulay was right. Macaulay was right in telling us that a single shelf in a European library was far richer than all the literatures of India and Arabia. It got Nandi's goat. Nandi was annoyed. Nandi was miffed. He was just an 18-year-old kid. He got up while the rest still sat. He got up and asked the Englishman to take a hike. Where? Literally, where? To Ramtek. In order to do what? To learn that one of the world's greatest poets and playwrights was right under his nose, to make him learn about Kalidas. These are the many ways in which probably the college that you have been part of, or you know, which is part of your city, the oldest college, mind you, in central India, has also produced its butterfly effects. Nandi, however, that day, there was one question that disturbed him, that stayed with him for the rest of his career, academic career. And that was what he wanted to, the question that bugged him, that rankled in his head was, why did his classmates continue to sit and not question the Englishman's atrocious statement? Why didn't they do something to call out the Englishman's lie? To such an extent that 16 years after he had completed his PhD, this particular question still rankled in his head. To do what? To do research. To do research on what? To seek answers to the question that why are Indians so submissive before Englishmen? Why are they so scared of English? And so what he did was to study hard and to study long, and on what? In order to investigate into the damaging impact that colonialism had, that more than 150 years of British Raj had over Indians. And his findings, well, he concluded that when the British came to India, they not only colonized India, but they also colonized the Indian mind. He wanted, therefore, to save, or not save is not the right word, he wanted to liberate Indian minds from this intellectual slavery, and also from a feeling of inferiority complex that perhaps you and I still carry, because it then takes a Shashi Tharoor to go to the Parliament of Commons to argue that, hey, all that the British did was to loot and plunder our country and leave us impoverished. Thank you so much.